Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Orion Pest Control. Monster Hunters. A long horror story from Reddit. Nosleep. The differences between specialty pest control companies and monster hunters will become clear as I describe the events of this week. To start, these aspiring Winchesters and Van Helsings go out of their way to pick fights with the atypical, sometimes without even a basic understanding of what they're up against. This causes problems not just for them, but for those of us that have to do damage control afterwards. Dealing with an infestation improperly only makes it worse. That's true of all pests, regardless of if they're typical or atypical. For example, most homeopathic or over-the-counter treatments for bed bugs are ineffective for the fact that they're sneaky little ones. In order to stop the infestation, the entire colony must be eliminated. It's not enough to just kill every adult you see. The reason for the impromptu bed bug PSA is because that's what Orion was finishing with when the monster hunters rolled up in what had to be the most ridiculous vehicle I'd ever seen in my life. Their incredibly bad transportation of choice was a motorhome boasting a flaming skull spray painted on the side of it with their phone number, which I will not disclose. My jaw dropped, watching it in disbelief as it parked a few houses over from where we were. Raina and Cherry had the honor of basking in the motorhome's glory with me, as well as cleaning up the mess its passengers would leave afterwards. Cherry voiced my thoughts perfectly. Is that a clown car? Anticipating that some nonsense was afoot, I joked, bet you $5 they're all wearing leather jackets. Raina quickly said, I'm not taking that bet. They're definitely wearing leather jackets. And at least one of them has a cowboy hat. And possibly a katana. Sure enough, two large men emerged from their skull-emblazoned transport, clad in leather dusters. And one was, in fact, wearing a black cowboy hat. Raina muttered, huh. No katanas. Cherry was visibly cringing. I take it you know these guys? I sighed, no, I just know the type. Another group just like them tried to deal with a dreamer a few years back and ended up making the entire situation several times worse, so, be ready to go to that house. Worse how? Raina asked, loading equipment into the back of the truck. Rather than trying to catch and release the dreamer, as we do, they tried to kill it. Unsuccessfully. In retaliation, the dreamer ended up forcing everyone in the house into a comatose state until we could get it calmed down. I explained. She nodded slowly. Great. When it comes to dealing with the atypical, it's best to do so with knowledge and respect. Going into it with the mindset of hunting monsters already puts you at a disadvantage. The neighbors belong in this world just as much as we do. They've lived through and seen things we can only dream of. While they can be dangerous, they are also capable of great acts of kindness as well as all the gray areas in between. On the subject of vigilantes, humanity has done the neighbors pretty dirty in the past. There's a part of me that can see why some of them hate us so much. We forced them to live in the mounds. And now we take the world we forced them to give us for granted. The very least we could do to make up for it is not complete to them if we can avoid it. While my co-workers finished packing up, I called Victor, watching the house the vigilantes disappeared into for any signs of turmoil. When I told him about the monster hunters, he said, yeah, I know about them. That homeowner called us not long after you three left. Tale incredibly old, they angry a housekeeper and didn't like the answer I gave them. About an hour later, they called back all smug about how much cheaper it is to call those guys. Our services aren't even that expensive, especially compared to some pest control companies. The client must be paying these guys in chicken nuggets. A housekeeper? I resisted the urge to groan. Well, that thing's going to transform. Yup. If it does, just try to make sure it doesn't kill anyone. He replied, sounding exhausted. While Raina, Cherry, and I have been attending to Orion's regular, and irregular, duties. He and Wes have been focused on the gingerbread house. Namely, trying to track it down. But, just as Deirdre predicted, it seems to keep moving. One of them will smell something sickly sweet or find crumbs left behind from discarded confections, only to discover that they're following a dead trail. A few days back, when we reconvened after the dead duo's search, Vic mentioned that they'd spotted black thorns wrapped around one of the trees decorated with cookies. That makes me wonder if the hunters are doing the same thing Orion is. Iolo hasn't mentioned anything about it in our sessions, but I could tell that the news of the gingerbread house had troubled him. The good news is that, so far, we haven't heard any reports of children going missing. We'll do what we can to ensure it stays that way. And since our initial meeting, the cookie hag, for lack of a better term, has not tried to contact me. No more desserts have been left by my door. Something I want to be clear on is that I'm not planning to do that deal with the gingerbread house's owner. Right now, the goal is just to get him to focus more on her than on me and in turn, use the threat of him finding her to keep her from luring any children to her home. The ultimate goal is to see if he considers her enough of a threat that driving her out would be sufficient in evening out my life debt to him. I know that it's risky and it's not well thought out. Believe me, I know. It's not ideal. But what other options do I have? And no, inmates. Getting with Iolo is not an option. More on Iolo later. Sorry to jump around so much, a lot has happened since I last spoke to Yins. These vigilantes were the root of the chaos we've been contending with. The one with the cowboy hat flew out of the front door like a bat out of hell. Amazingly enough, the hat stayed on his head. That was my cue to get my happy ass over there. I told the other two to join me once they were done loading up. Cowboy Hat saw me and started shaking his head at me. "Ma'am, you need to leave. There is an extremely dangerous creature inside this house, but we've got it under HEY." I walked right past him. Fun fact, they did not have it under control. As expected, the housekeeper had transformed. The lights were flickering. The TV showed static, which oddly sounded like a distant chorus of women singing hymns. Shouting was audible over the hymns, followed by the sound of wood splintering. I hurried, ignoring Cowboy Hat as he tried to grab me, presumably to pull me to safety. After weeks of dealing with Iolo's strength, speed, and skill, it seemed as if this man was moving in slow motion. He looked bewildered as I easily evaded him as I sought out the source of the commotion. The housekeeper's headless body was clawing at a closed door. From another room, I could hear the head cackling as its sharp, bloodied fingernails scraped deeper gashes into the wood. I tried to sneak up on it, keeping a hand on Ratcatcher. The body abruptly froze. After a moment of stillness, it began to levitate, rising higher until its stump of a neck was nearly brushing the ceiling. It then turned slowly to face me, slumped, and dangling as if it was hanging from a noose. I swung Ratcatcher in an upward arc just as it dove for me, outstretched hands wiggling towards my eyes. It swerved away from the blade, but not quickly enough, earning a thin slice along its side. More shouting. My co-workers had come in, much to Cowboy Hat's increased distress. The body had landed roughly on the floor, skidding to a stop against the client's white sofa. "Find the head!" I yelled, racing towards the housekeeper as its twitching hands groped at its injured side. Afterwards, I heard Raina's and Cherry's footsteps banging through the house regardless of Cowboy Hat's protests. Raina knew what she was doing, and while Cherry is obviously still learning, she seems to follow directions pretty well. I could count on them to deal with the head while I contended with the body. Meanwhile, poor Cowboy Hat was left standing in the living room, dumbfounded. "Who are you people? Please just stay back." I replied quickly, knowing that the transformed housekeeper was about to be even angrier and more dangerous after being hurt. Sure enough, a chair flew towards me as if thrown. I dropped down to avoid having my skull caved in by it, adrenaline warming my spine. cowboy hat swore and drew his gun as if it were going to do something. "Sir, please put the gun away and find somewhere to hide." I tried to be polite, I really did, but I didn't trust this guy not to shoot me instead of the housekeeper. And even if his aim were accurate, all he'd succeed in doing was making it angry even more. The housekeeper then raised its arms, causing a shelf to tip over onto cowboy hat. The gun went off. A hole appeared in the ground next to my foot, making me flinch from how close it had been to hitting me. "Please put that gun away before you hurt someone," I shouted at him, all politeness gone after that. "Ma'am, I'm a professional," he snapped. "Is he kidding?" "No, you're not doing it. Put it away." The housekeeper took the opportunity to rake its sharp nails through my pants and into my calf. With a yelp, I danced away as it rose, its hands continuing to reach for me. I stomped down on one of them. Somewhere in the house, the housekeeper's head screamed again. While its hand was pinned under my foot, I seized its wrist, trying to force the struggling housekeeper onto its stomach so that I could hold its arms behind its back. Cherry ran out first, panting, eyes wide, "We got it." Raina followed, grimacing as she held the housekeeper's head around its pointed ears as it gnashed its teeth like a rabid animal, trying fruitlessly to bite her. "We have to get the head and body out the door, then salt the threshold," I directed our trainee, dragging the flailing housekeeper's body to its feet so I could shove it outside. Cherry stepped around Cowboy Hat, who, thankfully, had put the safety on his gun, but hadn't placed it back into its holster. She held the door open for Raina and me as we carried our respective pieces of housekeeper outside. Raina tossed the head like a basketball, then I shoved the body across the threshold. Once that was over with, we hurriedly got the salt line in place. With that, the infestation was resolved. The housekeeper tucked its head under its arm, its free hand raised high, flipping us all off as it wandered towards where it knew the forest would be. "Yes, same to you." The door that the housekeeper had been trying to break down creaked open, revealing the other monster hunter. He marched towards us, barking, "What's going on? Where's the demon? And who are you?" "Demon?" Raina asked in disbelief. "You thought that was a demon?" I tried to regain my manners. "The housekeeper is taken care of. As long as the salt line isn't broken for the next 24 hours, it shouldn't be able to get back in." His hairless face turned bright red. "You didn't kill it? Once it has some time to calm down, it'll transform back into a regular housekeeper." I replied calmly, despite the frustration heating my gut. "There's no reason to kill it. That thing isn't human," he retorted. "It would have torn us apart if we hadn't defended ourselves." I sighed, shaking my head. "You know what? I don't have the time or patience for this. Just, please stop what you're doing and go back to wherever it is that you came from." As I stalked out the door, I heard the head vigilante shout after me, "Oh, I am not going nowhere. Not until that thing is gone." Before following me out, I heard Cherry say under her breath, "You're welcome, jackass." When Orion encountered them again a few days later, it wasn't much better. I hadn't been present for that one, thanks to a particularly time-consuming yellow jacket infestation. Raina had the displeasure of dealing with the vigilantes again, but this time, Wes got to be subjected to them as well. Though, I think it'd be more accurate to say that they were the ones subjected to Wes. My co-workers had been removing traps that they'd set to humanely catch a possum that was making itself at home in a suburbanite's garage. Naturally, Raina had recognized the stupid motorhome instantly as it made its way to the end of the cul-de-sac. She'd snapped, "Oh, not this shit again." Before setting her trapped possum down in the back of the truck to run after the clown car, her words, not mine, abandoning Wes just as he emerged from the house with his own upset, caged marsupial. Out of breath, Raina got to the vigilantes before they could enter the house. The leader scowled at her, "You again?" Between gulps of air, Raina argued, "Look, I get that, you think you're helping. But you'll make it worse. You can't just run into this gun blazing. Yeah? Watch me, little girl. When I heard that he'd called Raina that, Yin's better believe I was seeing red. However, when the douchebag turned back to the door, he'd been startled to find Wes standing in his way. Raina said our co-worker had just kind of appeared out of nowhere, she hadn't even heard him approach. Would I be more your size, big boy? He'd asked the leader. The leader had squared up, jaw raised, glaring at Wes. Cowboy Hat, to his credit, had tried to talk his friend down, but his words appeared to be ignored. Raina had thought that things were about to escalate to kindergarten levels when unexpectedly, the leader growled, "This am not the one we're looking for anyway." At least with that encounter, they managed to intercept the monster hunters before they could make a tough situation worse. Though, the client didn't seem happy to have Orion show up to deal with his false egg problem instead of the much cheaper vigilantes. And I have to say, the idea of them trying to hold a false egg at gunpoint just made me want to lock those guys in the face even more than I already did. We'd figure out what, or more appropriately, who the vigilantes were looking for on Saturday. The same day that Deirdre and I agreed to discuss where we stand. To tell the truth, I still didn't know 100% how I felt about her. I just knew that I didn't want there to be a day when she wasn't around. I've also come to the conclusion that the idea of love scares me more than any neighbor out there. Ever since Mom opened up to me about how my father made her feel like a bird trapped in a cage, I've had it in my head that love is a trap to fall into. I know that's not the message my mother wanted me to get from that story, but it's something that's haunted me. It's made previous relationships die before they could even fully begin. Don't get me wrong, I know Deirdre isn't like my father. Her kindness isn't a mask. It shines from her with the brilliance of the sun. What I worry about is being the one to trap her. How could I get closer to someone in good conscience knowing that I'm the obsession of someone like the mechanic? I told her all of this during our discussion. As usual, she had the patience of a saint. More patience than I probably deserve with the way I've been going about things. Once I finished voicing my thoughts, she gave me hers, speaking so gently that it made my heart ache. I know that your past was wrought with violence, and that you still have your fair share of it in your present. Don't make the mistake of thinking that I am not aware of the risks. You might even consider that you're well worth the risks, Nessa. I was completely taken aback, stunned into silence. Even knowing all of my baggage, she still didn't seem discouraged. Deirdre took my hand then. You take care of so many others. Why not allow someone else to take care of you, for once? You've already done so much for me. I reminded her. And it's put a target on your back. You've done plenty for me as well, Nessa. She traced the canteen strap for emphasis. You don't have to protect me. I believe I've told you that several times already. I know. So, listen, you stubborn mule of a woman. She scolded playfully. I prefer the term, determined. I replied with a smile of my own. We had a moment of silence before Deirdre uttered, you know that the huntsman wants you to feel isolated. With a sigh, I confirmed, I do. I have no desire to tell you what you can and can't do, but I will ask for what I want. And what I want is to see you unchained and happy someday. This is dangerous. Extremely dangerous. But in this line of work, danger is something to be expected, isn't it? I want to be careful, I finally said. But if you're alright with being in danger constantly, we could give it a shot. Deirdre's lips were soft against the back of my hand. So much tenderness in that touch. We've agreed to take things slow. To give ourselves the time to truly get to know each other and to rewrite my unhealthy definition of love. Maybe after some time passes, I can finally convince myself that it doesn't have to be a cage. We parted ways so that she could guide someone who'd been in a motorcycle accident to where they needed to go. The pull of the river is getting weaker and weaker with each person she helps. But before she set off to do that, I took a chance on getting my ribs broken by pulling the weeper into a hug. To her credit, she has been trying to teach her own strength more. This time, I could even breathe during the still too tight embrace. Worth it. That left me with 4 hours until sunset and wondering what to do with myself until then. I ended up deciding to take the roof off the Jeep and cruise around. What can I say? The midlife crisis is hitting early. Ordinarily, seeing the leaves begin to change excites me, filling me with promises of hot apple cider and getting lost in corn mazes. This fall, however, they were yet another reminder that Samhain was approaching. No. I promised myself then that I wouldn't let him fall for me. It wasn't going to be my last one. I let myself breathe in that crisp air, searching for the scent of dying leaves. For a brief moment, I achieved inner peace. Just as I was driving past Dylan's, I spotted that obnoxious skull-emblazoned motorhome in the parking lot. My fall vibes, as Raina would say, plummeted. Asterisk, they're still here? Ugh, what now? I turned so quickly into the parking lot that I hit the curb. Whoops. Good thing I picked a vehicle that can take a beating. The few people walking in the parking lot turned to gawk, openly judgmental about my blunder. One of those gawkers happened to be Cowboy Hat Guy, standing outside the door with a cigarette in his hand. He recognized me once I got out, snuffing it against the bottom of his shoe when I darted towards him. Before I could say anything, he held a hand up. Can we talk? I know we got off on the wrong foot. Yeah, I'll say. I grumbled, trying to look in the restaurant's windows. What are you trying to do now? Currently, dinner. He replied sheepishly. Oh. Cowboy Hat looked tired as he said, would like to apologize for my brother's behavior, by the way. And mine. We're not really at our best, right now. That was unexpected. Suddenly, Cowboy Hat looked much older. All the desire to argue with this man suddenly left me as I wondered what was weighing on his mind so heavily that it caused him to age before my eyes. He extended a weathered hand, introducing himself. I told him to call me Nessa, then warned him about giving his real name out. Do you mind if I join you too? I asked. He nodded, throwing his cigarette butt away before leading me to where his brother sat at a booth, staring down at his half-eaten burger as if unsure if he should finish it or not. When he saw me approaching with Cowboy Hat, his face immediately morphed into a scowl. Be nice. Cowboy Hat said as he sat next to him, letting me have the other side of the booth to myself. I started off by asking them what brought them to our neighborhood. If it's something that isn't human, I can help with that, I offered. I'm trained and experienced with that type of thing. Everyone at Orion is. The brothers exchanged a glance, Cowboy Hat raising his eyebrows impatiently. Eventually the leader sighed in defeat, pulling his phone out. We're looking for someone. He grunted. He pulled up a picture of him and another man sitting next to each other on motorcycles, explaining that the leader's son/Cowboy Hat's nephew had disappeared. The last they'd heard of him was a panicked voicemail he'd left about messing up really bad, and that he didn't stay dead. The son was familiar. Why was he familiar? As I stared at the picture, Cowboy Hat explained, at first, we thought he was on something. He's been having trouble, for a while. It hit me then. The man in the picture was the same one that the parasite in the mansion had taken the form of. The very same man who'd slit Victor's throat. Oh, no. Victor had said he'd already taken care of his murderer. The leader suddenly perked up when he saw my expression, the tough guy act melting away. You've seen him. I nodded, saying numbly, I think so. He swallowed, then quietly pleaded, please. I just need to know if he's alive. Please. How do you tell someone that? That your boss ate their son? I heard the little bell over the door jingle behind me. Somehow, even without turning around, even before the scent of black cherries hit my nose, I knew it was him. Quickly, I whispered to the brothers, "Don't tell him your name or look in his eyes." The leader's macho persona slid back into place as he hissed, "What? Howdy." He had that good old boy facade seamlessly in place as he gave them that boyish smile, though he did a double take as he saw me. Well, hope I wasn't interrupting. He was surprised to see me. So, I wasn't the one he was here for. Iolo didn't give me a chance to move over before sliding in next to me. Even at the other end of the bench, I still felt like I was too close to him. To my relief, Cowboy Hat had followed my advice and was staring intently down at his hands, which rested on the table. The leader kept glaring between Iolo and I, not knowing what was going on and clearly not happy about it. "So, I've been hearing that you all are going to sort out the weird stuff going on in this town," the mechanic said casually. The leader curtly replied, "Trying to. That's real noble of you, sir. If I didn't know Iolo better, I'd think he was being sincere. Something I can help you with, son?" The leader asked as he stared at daggers, apparently not feeling the same inclination to avoid Iolo's gaze as his brother did. The mechanic snickered, "Actually, I was thinking I could help you. I heard you two were looking for Nick." Cowboy Hat forgot all about averting his eyes the moment that name was spoken, looking up in shock. The leader's face went white. "How do you know him?" "Well, I don't know him, just know of him." Despite his friendly demeanor, I knew all too well what that glint in his eye meant. He had them and he knew it. He came here looking for a friend of mine. I could give you directions if you like. Locking eyes with Cowboy Hat, who seemed the more reasonable of the two, I subtly shook my head. Beneath the table, where the brothers couldn't see, a hand rested on my knee, then squeezed. If an onlooker saw this, the gesture would most likely appear to them affectionate, but I knew that it was a warning. Cowboy Hat finally spoke up. "We actually should be on our way." The leader shot him a desperate glance. "I'm not going nowhere. They both know my Nick." How did he not realize what was happening? That the one dangling his son in front of his face was baiting him? Toying with him? Desperation. That's what I saw when I looked at the slight quiver of the leader's mouth. He was so desperate to find his boy that he was willing to ignore the writing on the wall as well as his brother's growing unease. When I mouthed, "Go!" at Cowboy Hat, I earned another squeeze on the knee, though it was harder this time. The leader questioned, "Is he alive?" "I'm sorry," I said before Iolo could. His friend straightened him out. Iolo spoke over me. "He is not using since he got here. He technically wasn't lying. Can't use it if you're dead." Knowing that I was going to pay dearly for it later, I jerked my knee up, smashing Iolo's hand into the bottom of the table, causing everything on top of it to bounce violently. He didn't react at all. "I'm very sorry, but your son is dead," I quickly whispered, feeling terrible for having to tell him like that, but knowing that it'd be far crueler to string him along, like Iolo was. The mechanic didn't bother squeezing my leg that time. He didn't have to. My words fell upon deaf ears. They weren't what the leader wanted to hear. The leader pulled his phone out, asking Iolo to type in the address. The mechanic was more than happy to. Cowboy Hat watched, his face unreadable, but I could tell that he knew that something was wrong, even if his brother couldn't. "I know that they caused us and the neighbors trouble. But they didn't deserve what the hunters did to them." When they departed after paying their bill, my final attempt to help them was stopped by Iolo with a softly, but sternly spoken, "Don't." Suppressing a shiver at his tone, I questioned, "What do you want with them?" "They came to my goddamn town actin' all disrespectful." He let some of the coldness reach his gaze then. "And after you all gave them, not one, but 2 warnings. Not to mention that they shot at you. So now, they get to deal with us." I'd told them not to look into his eyes. God, why did they look? It was an accident. I retorted. Still keeping his voice low, Iolo replied, I don't care. He still did it. Do I need to go down the list of all the things you've done to me? He then chuckled with a smirk. I've actually been real gentle with you, believe it or not. Unfortunately, I did believe him, though the word gentle was being stretched to its limits, even by neighbor standards. May I get up? I asked. One last thing, he then reached over me to grab a sugar packet, shaking it as he questioned, you see the baker lately? The cookie hag. She was still hiding. How was she able to evade the hunters? She won't stop until she has to. I haven't. I answered. Hm. Well, if she approaches you again, you best tell me first. I was already going to get my ass kicked in training later that night. What was one daring question going to hurt? Is she a threat to you? The coldness was quickly taken over by mischief as Iolo laughed. I know what you're trying to do, Fiona. The least you could do is try to be more subtle. Just know the baker is a threat to everyone. Including you? He side-eyed me. After making sure nobody was trying to eavesdrop, I leaned into him, albeit reluctantly. I can get her to stop running. But first, I want your word that doing so will absolve me of my debt to you. He snorted, can you, now? Don't patronize me. You know she approached me. She's waiting for me. If she thinks that I'm going to bring her what she wants, she'll stop. That'll give you the time to find her. That infuriating smirk didn't falter, and what exactly does she want? I won't tell you until you agree to release me. He shrugged, I'll think about it. Now, if you don't mind, I got somewhere to be. He then had the audacity to kiss me on the cheek before telling me he'd see me later. I don't get him. Sometimes he acts like he wants nothing more than to see me suffer. Other times, it's like that. I don't understand him at all. Maybe it's an effort to confuse me, or he doesn't know what he wants either. Or it's some weird fluctuation between two extremes. To summarize, I don't know the mind of a hunter and I'd like to keep it that way. Once I got back to the jeep, I called Victor, telling him about the situation. When I revealed the reason the vigilantes came here in the first place, Victor let out a heavy sigh and grumbled, shit. I didn't have to see him to know he was rubbing the bridge of his nose. We can't do anything for them, now. He eventually muttered. They were warned. They had plenty of opportunities to stop harassing the neighbors. All that's left to do is pray that the hunters are feeling merciful. Spoiler alert, they weren't. There was a new tree in the mechanic's clearing that night. The brothers had been fused together, what remained of their torsos making up the trunk of the tree. All that was left of the leader's skull was the mandible. The cowboy hat was perched on one of the top branches like an ornament. The blood hadn't even dried yet. I nearly vomited when I saw that. Iolo didn't comment, strumming his banjo peacefully. As expected, training was rough. He definitely was not happy about me smashing his hand. Oh well. He deserved it. But at least I had Deirdre to go home to. Speaking of, our dance felt different that night. It was different. The steps were more familiar to me now. I still looked like one of those inflatable men that they use to advertise used car lots compared to her agility, but I knew what I was supposed to be doing. When we placed the backs of our wrists together, she kept her gaze locked on mine as we went about in our usual circle. She didn't look away, even as we switched wrists, a faint smile pulling at her lips. I let myself be mesmerized by her, almost missing a step. When the circle stopped and we crossed our arms together to join hands, my right hand in her right, my left in her left, I found myself focusing on her lips, watching as she mouthed the count for our pace. 2 measures to the left, then 2 to the right. We linked arms afterwards, spinning with each other on one side 4 times, then repeated on the left side. Where things escalated was when we crossed hands again, moving close to prepare for the turn. I stopped. So did Deirdre. For a moment we stayed there, close together, hands clutched together. Then she stood on her tiptoes, pressing her lips against mine. As quickly as it happened, she suddenly completed the turn, smiling at me cheekily, a trace of pink on her cheeks. I shook my head at her, feeling the back of my neck heat up in turn, then did my own spin. The dance continued on after that. Sorry this update was a bit later than usual. As Yins can see, I've had my hands full. And unless the mechanic accepts my offer, it's probably not going to get easier anytime soon. At least now I know that he considers the cookie hag to be a genuine threat. I'll let Yins know if he makes a decision. And I think I have a girlfriend, now. So that's something.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe, The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.